It was a bright and sunny Tuesday afternoon. The kind of day where the sky is so blue, and the sun is so warm, it feels like nothing bad could ever happen. Monica Hayes was walking down the street, carrying a bottle of water she had just bought from the corner store. She walked quietly, her steps steady, her head slightly lowered. She didn't seem like the kind of person anyone would notice. To everyone around her, she looked like just another person running errands. She wore a simple pair of jeans and a plain grey hoodie, her sneakers making soft sounds against the pavement. Her face was calm, almost unreadable, as if she had no worries in the world. But Monica had a reason for staying so quiet and unnoticed. The truth? Monica wasn't just anyone. Monica carried a secret so big it could change everything. But for now, she stayed under the radar. She liked it better this way. Life was easier when people didn't stop to ask questions or try to figure out who she really was. She glanced at the small park across the street where a few kids were laughing and playing on the swings. A soft smile formed on her face. It was a peaceful moment. But moments like these don't always last. As she turned the corner and began walking down a quieter street, Monica felt the familiar sound of tires rolling on the pavement behind her. A black and white patrol car slowed down as it approached. Her heart skipped a beat. The car pulled up beside her, its windows rolled down. Inside sat a man in a crisp police uniform. His sunglasses reflected the sunlight, and his face was stern, almost cold. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Monica. "Hey, you," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Monica stopped walking and turned to face him. She kept her expression neutral, calm. "Yes, officer," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he asked, his tone suspicious. "I'm just walking home," Monica said simply. The officer tilted his head slightly, studying her. His hand rested on the edge of the open window, fingers tapping impatiently. "Home, huh? You live around here?" Monica gave a small nod. "Yes, sir. Just a few blocks away." But the officer didn't look convinced. His eyes moved up and down, as if trying to figure her out. Monica stood still, her posture relaxed, but her mind was racing. She had dealt with people like him before, people who made snap judgments, people who thought they knew everything about someone just by looking at them. The officer opened his car door and stepped out. He adjusted his belt, the holster on his hip glinting in the sunlight. He wasn't a big man, but his presence was commanding, almost intimidating. "What's in your pockets?" he asked sharply. Monica blinked, confused for a moment. "Excuse me," I said, "what's in your pockets?" "Empty them." "Now," he demanded, his voice louder this time. Monica hesitated for a second but then reached into her hoodie pocket. She pulled out a set of keys and her wallet, holding them up for him to see. "That's it," she said calmly. The officer stepped closer, squinting at her. "What are you doing here, really?" he pressed, his tone even more accusing now. Monica met his gaze, her calmness unwavering. "I already told you, officer. I'm walking home." But her words didn't seem to matter. The officer's hand moved to the taser on his belt. He didn't pull it out, not yet, but the threat was clear. The street felt quieter now, almost too quiet. A few people had stopped on the sidewalk, watching the interaction from a distance. Some of them whispered to each other, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. A man across the street reached for his phone, holding it up to record. Monica noticed all of this, but she didn't flinch. She stayed calm, her breathing steady. She had learned long ago that people like this officer thrived on fear. If she showed fear, he would think he had power over her. And Monica wasn't about to give him that satisfaction. The officer took another step closer, his hand still on his taser. "I don't like your attitude," he said, his voice low and full of warning. Monica tilted her head slightly, her expression still calm but now with a hint of something else, confidence. I'm not giving you an attitude, officer. I'm just answering your questions. Her steady tone seemed to catch him off guard. For a split second, he hesitated, as if unsure of what to do next. But Monica wasn't just standing there passively. Beneath her calm exterior, her mind was working quickly. She had noticed the patrol car's number painted on the side. She had seen the name embroidered on his uniform. Every detail mattered, and Monica was the kind of person who noticed everything. What the officer didn't know, what nobody there knew, was that Monica had backup. She always had backup. And as the officer's hand tightened around his taser, Monica's fingers moved discreetly into her jacket pocket. She pressed a button on the small device hidden there. It was silent, invisible to everyone around her, but the signal had been sent. Across the street, a black SUV rolled to a stop. Monica stood a little taller, her calmness now tinged with an air of quiet authority. The officer didn't notice the SUV at first, but Monica did. And she knew what was coming next. For now, though, she said nothing. She let the moment hang in the air, waiting to see what the officer's next move would be. Officer Davis was driving his patrol car down the quiet street when he noticed Monica. She was walking calmly, holding a bottle of water in her hand. To him, though, she looked out of place. His eyes narrowed as his car slowed down. Davis was the type of officer who often made quick judgments about people, and Monica had just caught his attention. "Hey, you!" Davis called out sharply, his voice cutting through the still afternoon air as he rolled down his window. His tone wasn't friendly, it was the kind of voice people knew meant trouble. Monica stopped walking and turned to face him. Her face remained calm, her eyes steady. She had no reason to panic, no reason to run. "Yes, officer," she replied politely, her voice soft but clear. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he asked, his tone full of suspicion. Monica took a small breath before answering. "I'm just walking back home," she said simply. Her answer wasn't what Davis wanted to hear. Her calmness seemed to annoy him even more. To him, she didn't seem nervous enough, didn't seem like she was trying to explain herself properly. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped, his voice louder this time. Monica blinked, surprised by his reaction. "I'm not being smart with you," she said, still calm. "I'm just answering your question." But Davis wasn't in the mood to listen. He opened the door of his car, stepping out onto the sidewalk. The sound of his boots hitting the pavement seemed louder than it should have been, echoing in the quiet neighborhood. His hand rested on the taser strapped to his belt, a warning that didn't go unnoticed. Monica stood still, watching him carefully. She wasn't afraid, but she knew how to stay calm in situations like this. She had dealt with people like Davis before, people who thought they could intimidate her because of how she looked or where she was walking. "Let me see what's in your pockets," Davis demanded, stepping closer to her. Monica raised her eyebrows slightly. "Why?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. "Because I said so," Davis shot back. "Empty them. Now." Monica nodded slowly, deciding not to argue. She reached into the front pocket of her hoodie and pulled out her wallet and keys. Holding them up, she said, "This is all I have." Davis stared at the items in her hands, his eyes narrowing even more. He didn't look satisfied. "That's it? You sure about that?" he pressed, stepping even closer. "Yes, officer," Monica replied. "That's it." By now, a few people on the street had stopped to watch. A man walking his dog paused at the corner, his eyes fixed on the scene. Two women sitting on a nearby porch exchanged worried glances. One of them reached for her phone, holding it up as if to record what was happening. The tension in the air was thick, almost like a storm waiting to break. Davis noticed the small group of onlookers but didn't seem to care. He was focused on Monica, his hand still resting on his taser. "You don't look like you belong here," he said, his voice low but full of accusation. Monica tilted her head slightly, her expression still calm. "I'm just walking home," "Officer," she repeated. Her calmness seemed to make Davis even angrier. He took another step closer, now standing just a few feet away from her. "I don't like your attitude," he said, his voice sharp. "I don't mean to give you an attitude," Monica replied. "I'm just answering your questions." Davis stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to decide what to do next. The hand resting on his taser tightened slightly, and the crowd of onlookers grew larger. Some people were now recording with their phones, their faces tense as they watched the scene unfold. Monica noticed the phones, too, but she didn't move. She stood tall, her breathing steady, her face calm. She had learned long ago that staying calm was the best way to deal with situations like this. Fear only gave people like Davis more power, and Monica wasn't about to give him that. "You've got some nerve," Davis muttered, shaking his head. "Walking around here like you own the place." Monica didn't reply. She could feel the weight of the crowd's eyes on her, could hear the murmurs of people talking quietly to each other. But she stayed focused on Davis, watching his every move. The man across the street, the one with the dog, took a step closer. He called out, "Is everything okay here?" Davis turned sharply, glaring at the man. "Mind your business," he snapped. The man didn't back down. "She doesn't look like she's doing anything wrong," he said. Davis scowled, but before he could respond, another voice joined in. "Why are you harassing her?" one of the women from the porch asked. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, and Davis's jaw tightened. He didn't like being questioned, especially not in front of a growing audience. Monica took a small step back, her hands still holding her wallet and keys. She could feel the shift in the air, the way the tension was building. But she also knew she wasn't alone. The crowd was watching, and their presence was a kind of protection. Still, Davis didn't seem ready to back down. His pride was on the line now, and Monica could see it in the way he stood, the way his hand hovered near his taser. But Monica didn't flinch. She stayed calm, her eyes steady as she looked at him. "I'm not doing anything wrong, officer," she said again, her voice firm but polite. The crowd grew quieter, waiting to see what would happen next. Davis glanced around, his eyes flicking from Monica to the people watching. He seemed to realize that he was being recorded, that every move he made was being documented. For a moment, he hesitated, his hand dropping slightly from his taser. But his face was still tight with anger, and Monica could tell that this wasn't over yet. She stood her ground, ready for whatever came next. Sometimes, the calmest person in the room is the strongest. And Monica? She wasn't just calm, she was prepared. Officer Davis's voice echoed down the street as he barked his command. "Empty your pockets," he shouted, his tone sharp and full of authority. People nearby stopped in their tracks, their heads turning toward the commotion. Monica stayed calm, her expression steady as she reached into her hoodie pocket. She didn't argue or hesitate. Pulling out her wallet and keys, she held them up so Davis could see. "This is all I have," she said quietly. Davis didn't seem satisfied. He stepped closer, his hand resting on the taser strapped to his belt. "Why are you even here?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing as he stared her down. Monica's calmness didn't waver. She looked at him directly, taking a deep breath before answering. "I don't think that's a question you're allowed to ask," she said, her voice steady and polite. That one sentence seemed to light a fire in Davis. His face turned red, his jaw tightening. He wasn't used to people standing their ground, especially not someone like Monica. The crowd watching grew larger, whispers spreading among them. Some people pulled out their phones, recording what was happening. "Don't talk back to me," Davis snapped, his voice growing louder. He stepped even closer, his anger clear in every movement. Monica stayed where she was, not moving an inch. Her calmness seemed to irritate him even more. She knew exactly what she was doing, but Davis didn't know that. He thought she was just some random person walking down the street, someone he could intimidate. Then, without warning, Davis grabbed his taser and fired. The crackling sound of the taser filled the air, followed by a collective gasp from the crowd. Monica fell to the ground, her body jerking as the electrical current hit her. A woman in the crowd screamed, and others shouted in disbelief. "What is he doing?" someone yelled. "He can't do that," another voice said. Phones were raised higher, capturing every moment. Davis, however, seemed completely unaware of the growing outrage around him. He stood over Monica, his expression still hard and unyielding. But Monica wasn't out of control. Even as she lay on the ground, her mind stayed sharp. She knew this wasn't the time to panic. Slowly, she moved her hand toward the inside pocket of her jacket. She wasn't reaching for a weapon. She wasn't trying to fight back. Instead, her fingers found a small button hidden inside the fabric. Without looking, she pressed it. The action was subtle, so subtle that Davis didn't notice. But something had been set in motion. Across the street, the sound of engines filled the air. 3 large black SUVs came into view, their windows tinted so dark that no one could see inside. The vehicles moved smoothly, stopping in perfect formation just a few feet from where Davis and Monica were. The crowd turned their attention to the SUVs, their murmurs growing louder. "Who are they?" someone asked. "I don't know, but they don't look like regular people," another replied. Davis, still focused on Monica, finally noticed the vehicles. He straightened up, his hand still gripping the taser, but now his expression showed a flicker of uncertainty. He didn't recognize the SUVs, and he didn't like surprises. The doors of the SUVs opened in unison, and men in black suits stepped out. They wore dark sunglasses and earpieces, their movements precise and controlled. The way they carried themselves made it clear they weren't ordinary men. They were professionals, and they meant business. The leader of the group, a tall man with sharp features, walked toward Davis. His expression was unreadable, but his presence was commanding. The crowd fell silent, all eyes on him as he approached. "Step away from her," the man said, his voice calm but firm. Davis hesitated, his grip tightening on the taser. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice losing some of its confidence. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out a badge and held it up for Davis to see. The crowd gasped again, some people leaning closer to get a better look. "Special Agent?" Davis's face paled slightly, his bravado faltering. "What is this?" he asked, his voice quieter now. The agent didn't flinch. "This is me telling you to step away from her. Now," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Davis looked down at Monica, who was still on the ground. Her calm expression hadn't changed, and now there was a faint hint of something else: confidence. She didn't look afraid. She didn't look helpless. Slowly, Davis lowered the taser. The agent gestured toward one of the other men, who stepped forward and helped Monica to her feet. She dusted herself off, her movements steady, as if she hadn't just been tossed moments ago. The crowd erupted into murmurs again, trying to piece together what was happening. "Is she with them?" someone asked. "Who is she?" another voice chimed in. Davis took a step back, his eyes darting between Monica and the agents. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice shaky. Monica turned to face him, her expression still calm but now holding a hint of authority. "I tried to give you a chance to do the right thing," she said softly, her voice steady and clear. The leader of the agents stepped forward, addressing the crowd. "We're taking it from here," he said, his tone professional. The agents escorted Monica toward one of the SUVs, the crowd parting to let them pass. Davis stood frozen, watching as the scene unfolded. His hands clenched into fists, but he didn't make another move. As Monica climbed into the SUV, she glanced back at Davis one last time. Her gaze was steady, her calmness unshaken. The SUVs pulled away, leaving Davis standing there in the middle of the street. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the videos recorded that day would soon make their way across the internet, raising questions and sparking conversations. And Monica? She wasn't just a random person walking down the street. She was someone much more important, and this was only the beginning of the truth coming to light. The sound of car doors opening filled the air as the men in black suits stepped out of the sleek SUVs. Their dark sunglasses glinted in the sunlight, and their movements were sharp and purposeful. The quiet murmurs of the crowd suddenly stopped. Everyone was watching, holding their breath. Officer Davis, who just moments ago had been full of arrogance and control, stood frozen in place. His grip tightened on the taser still in his hand, but for the first time, his confident expression faltered. He looked around at the men approaching him, his eyes darting nervously from one to the next. One of the men, tall with a strong build and an earpiece tucked neatly into his ear, stepped forward. His gaze was steady, and his voice, when he spoke, was calm but firm. "Drop the taser," he commanded, pointing directly at Davis. Davis blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What? Who are you?" he stammered. His usual tone of authority was gone, replaced by confusion and unease. "I said, drop the taser," the man repeated, his voice not rising but carrying a weight that made it clear he wasn't making a request. Davis hesitated. His fingers twitched around the taser, but the presence of the suited men seemed to drain the fight out of him. Slowly, he lowered his arm, letting the taser dangle loosely in his hand. "What's going on here?" Davis demanded, trying to sound in control but failing miserably. He took a small step back, his eyes flickering to the silent crowd that was now glued to the unfolding scene. Monica, who had been lying on the ground, began to move. Slowly and steadily, she pushed herself up, brushing the dirt off her clothes as she stood. There was no rush in her movements, no sign of panic or weakness. She stood tall, her face calm and composed. All eyes turned to her. The crowd, Davis, even the men in suits, they were all waiting for her next move. Monica looked at Davis, her gaze steady and unwavering. Her voice, when she spoke, was strong and clear, carrying a weight that silenced the entire street. "I was trying to give you a chance to do the right thing," she said, her words measured and deliberate. Davis's face twisted in confusion. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "Who even are you?" Monica didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a step forward, her calm demeanor making her seem even more powerful than the men surrounding her. "I gave you every chance to act with decency, with fairness," she continued. "But you chose to abuse your authority." Her words hit like a hammer. The crowd, still frozen in place, seemed to lean in closer, waiting to hear what she would say next. The tall man in the suit stepped forward again, reaching into his jacket. Davis tensed, his hand twitching toward his belt, but he didn't move further. The man pulled out a small black case and held it out to Monica. Monica took the case and opened it slowly. Inside was a shiny batch, its silver surface catching the sunlight. She held it up, turning it slightly so Davis and everyone else could see. "Special Agent Monica Hayes." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones were raised higher, cameras zooming in to capture the moment. The tension that had filled the street just moments ago now shifted into something else: shock, awe, and a growing sense of justice. Davis's face went pale. "Wait, what?" he stammered. You're an agent." Monica didn't answer right away. She let the badge speak for itself as she carefully placed it back into the case. Then, she looked at Davis again, her expression calm but unyielding. "I work for the federal government," she said. "I've spent years dealing with people like you, people who think they can treat others however they want because of the badge on their chest. But not today." Davis took another step back, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find the words to respond. I didn't know," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's the problem," Monica replied, her tone sharp. "You didn't care to know. You judged me because of how I looked, because I didn't fit your idea of what someone belongs in this neighborhood." The suited man beside her stepped forward again. "Officer Davis," he said, his voice like steel, "you're under investigation for misconduct and abuse of power. We've seen enough today to proceed with formal charges." The color drained completely from Davis's face. "No, wait, this isn't what it looks like," he tried to argue, his voice rising in desperation. "I didn't save it," the agent interrupted. "Anything you say can be used against you. I suggest you stop talking." The crowd erupted in whispers and murmurs, their shock giving way to a sense of satisfaction. For many of them, this was a moment they had waited for, a moment where justice seemed to stand tall against abuse. As Davis was handcuffed and led toward one of the SUVs, Monica turned back to the crowd. Her calm expression softened slightly as she addressed them. "Thank you for standing here today," she said. "For recording, for watching, for holding people accountable. This is how we make sure the right thing is done." The crowd broke into applause, cheers rising above the sound of the engines as the SUVs prepared to leave. Davis was loaded into one of the vehicles, his once confident posture now slumped with defeat. Monica stood for a moment longer, watching as the scene unfolded. Then, she turned and walked toward the waiting SUVs. Before climbing in, she paused, glancing back at the crowd one last time. Her eyes scanned the faces of the people watching, her gaze steady and full of purpose. Sometimes, the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest. Sometimes, they're the calmest. And as the SUVs pulled away, Monica knew that this wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been mistreated, judged unfairly, or underestimated. Today, justice had been served, and Monica Hayes had shown the world exactly who she was. The moment Officer Davis was placed in handcuffs, the crowd erupted into a mix of cheers and gasps. Some people clapped, others recorded on their phones, and a few even shouted words of encouragement toward Monica. What had started as a tense and uncomfortable scene was now turning into something remarkable, justice being served in real time. Officer Davis, who just moments ago had stood tall and arrogant, was now hunched over, his hands bound behind his back. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice shaky and desperate. "This is a mistake. I didn't do anything wrong." But his protests were ignored. The men in black suits, Monica's team, moved with precision and purpose. One of them placed a hand firmly on Davis's shoulder, guiding him toward one of the sleek black SUVs parked nearby. "You have the right to remain silent," one of them said firmly, reciting Davis's rights. The irony wasn't lost on the crowd. Here was a man who had spent his career wielding authority over others, now facing the same consequences he had likely imposed on many. Davis twisted his head, trying to plead his case to the crowd. "You don't understand," he yelled. "She's not who she says she is. This isn't fair." But no one was listening to him. The people in the crowd were focused on Monica. She stood tall, her expression calm and steady. To many, she looked like a hero, a person who had stood up to injustice and won. As Davis was escorted into the back seat of one of the SUVs, Monica took a step forward. She faced the crowd, her voice clear and strong. "Thank you for recording this," she said, her words carrying over the murmurs and whispers. "Justice is only possible when we hold people accountable. You all played a part in making sure the truth was seen." The crowd fell silent for a moment, taking in her words. Then, someone shouted, "You're amazing, Monica." Another voice called out, "We've got your back." Monica smiled softly, nodding in appreciation. But she didn't linger on the praise. She knew there was still work to be done. The crowd may have seen what happened, but the real change would come later when the videos were shared, the truth spread, and people began to question how things like this could happen in the first place. As the SUVs began to pull away, taking Davis with them, Monica walked toward the last vehicle in the line. Before getting in, she turned one last time to face the crowd. "Never stop standing up for what's right," she said. "Your voices matter. Your actions matter. The crowd erupted into cheers once again, their energy filling the air. People waved and clapped as the SUVs drove off, carrying with them a story that was just beginning to unfold. The videos taken by the crowd spread like wildfire. Within hours, they were all over social media, news sites, and even television. People watched in disbelief as the footage showed Davis shouting at Monica, pulling out his taser, and ultimately being handcuffed by Monica's team. The comments poured in. Finally, someone standing up to abuse of power. This is what accountability looks like. She handled that with so much grace and strength. Respect. It didn't take long for Davis's department to release a statement. They announced that he had been placed on immediate suspension pending an investigation. But the damage to his reputation had already been done. The public outrage was swift and loud. People demanded answers, and it became clear that Davis's actions weren't just a one-time incident. There were other complaints against him that had been buried in the past. Within a week, Davis was officially fired. He lost his badge, his authority, and the career he had used to mistreat others. For many, it was a moment of justice, a sign that even those in power couldn't escape the consequences of their actions. But the story wasn't just about Davis, it was about Monica. As more people learned who she was, they were amazed. She wasn't just an ordinary woman walking down the street. She was a federal agent, someone who had dedicated her life to protecting others and standing up for what was right. News outlets reached out to her for interviews, but Monica kept her responses simple. "This isn't about me," she told one reporter. "It's about making sure that everyone is treated fairly, no matter who they are or what they look like." Her humility only made people admire her more. She became a symbol of quiet strength, someone who showed that you don't have to shout to make a difference. As the weeks went on, Monica's story continued to inspire people. Schools held discussions about fairness and justice, using her story as an example. Community leaders organized meetings to talk about accountability and how to prevent abuse of power. And for the people who had been on that street that day, the memory of what happened stayed with them. They remembered how Monica had stayed calm and strong, even in the face of mistreatment. They remembered how she had turned the tables, showing that appearances can be deceiving and that real power comes from standing up for what's right. One woman, who had been recording the scene on her phone, summed it up best in a post she shared online. "I was there that day. I saw how Officer Davis treated Monica like she was nobody. But Monica didn't let him define her. She stood her ground, and she showed all of us that strength isn't about how loud you are, it's about how steady you can be when it matters most." For Monica, life moved on, but the impact of that day stayed with her. She continued her work as a federal agent, now with even more determination. She knew that her story had touched lives, but she also knew there was still so much work to be done. Her quiet strength and unwavering commitment to justice became a source of hope for many. And for those who had doubted her, who had underestimated her, she was now a powerful reminder that the strongest people often look the most ordinary. And for Officer Davis? His name became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when power is abused and accountability catches up. In the end, the day wasn't just about one arrest or one person. It was about something much bigger, the idea that justice is possible when people come together, stand up, and refuse to let injustice win.